Justice for Assange. Julian Assange. Assange told no truths to expose those lies. He had enough access to be considered a spy. We tried to play it safe and go straight because death was on the right wing. We tried our best but only could guess that going left's the right thing. When going left could be right, if y'all was good then why hide? If you really stood for truth and justice then why commit war crimes? The grassroots are past due, got us thinking cash rules. Want us happy buying lies and threaten our lives when we tell the truth. We believe that speech is free. We think out loud and they can see the way we think, and if you think that being white can save your skin, I beg of you to think again. Just look at Julian, they really trying to do him in, conspiring to do him in. They hired men to do him in, like they think that he could do it again. Is this preventative, or is it punishment? And why are they witch hunting him, even now, after he already done the thing? The governments are hypocrites, the citizens misrepresented. And when the poor children learn of this, you shadow ban the journalists and murder all of the truth seekers, threatening all the truth speakers. That's why in my community, we commit buffoonery, cheap jewelry, expensive clothes and high-end sneakers. But the type of peoples we become are getting tired of playing dumb. If you really want to make a statement, free Julian Assange.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Alan Minsky, Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, and I am really honored to welcome you to an event that we are co-hosting along with the Julian Assange Defense Committee. And this is going to be a panel we're going to have on the case of Julian Assange and its relevance for the proper practice of journalism in the country and in the world, and also how the case is relevant for free speech and the maintenance of free speech in our democratic republic. And we're going to have a great group of panelists. First, we're going to hear from Amy Goodman, who is the host of the exceptional media production Democracy Now! Then we're going to hear from a PDA Advisory Board member and Julian Assange Defense Committee Board member, Marjorie Cohen, and followed by USC Professor Jody Armour, and then Nathan Fuller, who works for and with the Assange Defense Committee, who's going to let people know what's up with the Defense Committee. And just to properly start this off, and I was talking to the audience before we started the recording, Julian Assange, to my mind, and I think my interpretation is correct, is being persecuted by the United States of America because he is doing exactly what should be done by any citizen of conscience, which is to let the citizenry know what our government is doing in our name, what the government of the United States is doing so that people of the world understand it, and provide information that we really all have a right to have, but that the military is keeping from us. And I have always felt, since WikiLeaks became well known to all of us, that in fact, Julian Assange has been very cautious about what he does make available. And in particular, what he is exposing are not, future plans, right? We all understand militaries are not going to want their battle plans to be revealed, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's not what's important here. What's important is he is exposing crimes that have happened. And not only that, they're crimes that have happened, right? And therefore, if we have an honest justice system, they need to be known by people so that the crimes can be prosecuted. But they are crimes that are happening in a very clear pattern, such that they represent a continuity and basically a policy. And therefore, institutionally, people need to understand what is going on with the institutions that are generating these crimes, and they're violent and horrible crimes. And on top of that, much about what a democratic society needs to know about what its government is doing in order to be able to intelligently have a say in what's going to be done by the government needs to come forward, and he's providing that information. And all of this is exactly what the post-Cold War US government and our contemporary US government does not want us to know. In other words, everything that WikiLeaks is doing, right, in bringing forward this information in a highly ingenious 21st century digital form, that in the way that they practice what they do, is in fact not something that should be prosecuted, but something that should be heralded if we believe in a democratic society. So I do think this is a case that, again, the powers that be do not want us active in. But I think we really have, it's really incumbent upon us to do what we can to let everyone in our country and around the world know that we stand for the practice of journalism, we stand for the flow of free information, and we stand for when criminal activity is done, most importantly in an ongoing process, that it be revealed to people so that we can act upon the crimes and try to cease these violent crimes from happening. So that's my introductory remarks. I think this is very important, and Progressive Democrats of America is really proud to be working with the Julian Assange Defense Committee, and we look forward to working together going forward. And with that, I'm incredibly honored to introduce someone who I was honored to work with alongside at Pacifica Radio for a long time, almost 2 decades while I was there. I think really just an absolute beacon in our times, and the host and producer of Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman. Welcome, Amy.
Well, Alan, the privilege is all mine, having worked with you at KPFK, and it's such an honor to be with all of you, especially addressing this critical issue. Think back just a few months ago to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and to what happened in the days before that withdrawal. What has now become, to say the least, infamous is the US drone strike in Kabul. Now, the reason we know about this is there were so many international reporters there to cover the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And while the Pentagon immediately said they had killed a terrorist, the reports from the ground were very different. And that's because reporters were there to document this, to talk to the family members. And it turned out, no, they hadn't killed a terrorist. They killed an Afghan man who worked with US and international humanitarian organizations. He was coming home at night. He had been delivering water to people in need in Kabul. And as he drove in his driveway, as he did every night, all the kittles in his household would come running out. And the Pentagon in this drone strike killed 10 people, 7 of them children. It was critical that reporters be there and let us know what had happened, which forced the Pentagon to retract what they had said and tell the truth about what had happened. Multiply that drone strike over and over and over again over the last 20 years, when reporters weren't there in the countryside of Afghanistan or in Iraq for that matter. How many of these cases went undocumented, where family members would cry out, "We want justice, this can't happen again," and yet it happened again and again. And so these drone strikes, or these attacks from above, these violations of humanitarian law of humanity. I want to go now to Julian Assange and what he has allowed us to know. I want to go to 6 months before July 2007. It was in the winter of 2007. And there were 2 Iraqis who were walking along, and a US Apache helicopter was flying overhead. They realized they were being targeted. They didn't know what to do. They put their hands up in a kind of surrender. The crew in the Apache helicopter called back to base, said these 2 guys are trying to surrender. Lawyer in base says you can't surrender to a helicopter, and they blew them away. I dare say that if we had known that at the time, I'm sure many people on this Zoom call gasp when you hear that. If we knew that, there would have been an investigation, but there wasn't because we didn't know it. 6 months later, July 12th, 2007, a group of men are walking in New Baghdad, a section of Baghdad in Iraq, and they are bringing two Reuters employees, Namir Noor Eldin, a 22-year-old up-and-coming videographer holding his camera, and his driver, Saeed Shama, he was 40 years old, father of four, to a place that had been bombed the day before. They wanted them to film what had happened in their community. This same, another Apache helicopter from the same unit is flying overhead. They're not rogue. Again, they call back to base. They ask for permission to engage. There's reporters with cameras below. They get that permission and they blow the people away below. Namir is killed immediately. Saeed Shama is crawling along the ground and a white van pulls up. It's a dad taking his kids to school. And he gets out to pick up Saeed Shama. Again, they ask for permission to engage. They get it and they blow up the van. The kids actually get out. They're critically injured. US soldiers on the ground bring them to a hospital. Saeed Shama is killed. Reuters demanded to know for years what happened to their employees. They were beloved in the Reuters community. You know, when journalists would just come in, as they say, you know, parachute in for a couple of weeks. Saeed Shama is more than a driver. He is locating them. He is a fixer. He is helping them understand what's happening in Iraq. And Namir Noor Eldin is the videographer. They couldn't get the video. Chelsea Manning goes to Iraq, is an intel officer in Iraq, sees this video. And what Julian Assange is charged with, among other charges, is getting this video from Chelsea Manning and releasing it. They called it collateral damage. And I dare say Saeed, Namir, and the other men in the community would be alive today if we knew what happened 6 months before. And how is this documented? In the massive releases of information that WikiLeaks did. The Iraq war logs, the Afghan war diary, the decades of cables from the State Department. But he didn't just release it, right? He worked with many journalistic organizations like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like the Guardian, El País, and other publications around the world. They won many of the most prestigious awards in journalism. And ultimately, Julian Assange is imprisoned. He is first takes refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy. When Rafael Correa was the president of Ecuador, he granted him political asylum there. He lived there for years. I visited him there, interviewed him a number of times. And then he was taken into the maximum security Belmarsh prison, where he is today, where he has been held for more than 1,000 days. This is not just about Julian Assange. This is about freedom of the press. And it's a threat to all journalists. And that means to all of society, because journalists, freedom of the press is about people's right to know. And that's what is most threatened. If those war logs had been released at the time, we would have known what had happened. And then we would have known what had happened 6 months later. But we did get to see. WikiLeaks ultimately got that video basically subtitled it, explained what it was, and released it as a video several years later in 2010 called Collateral Murder. And this is what so infuriated the White House, the US government, but was absolutely critical to challenging what I.F. Stone said, right? I.F. Stone, the great muckraking journalist who was teaching journalism students, and said, if you can remember 2 words, remember governments lie. If you can remember 3 words, remember all governments lie. And that's why we need journalism in a free and democratic society, is to ensure that we're able to know what's done in our name. That's what Julian Assange has done. That's why he's at Belmarsh. I look forward to hearing the lawyers talking about, the latest in the case of his being extradited to the United States and facing over 170 years in prison. He had a mini stroke in October when one of his hearings began. It is absolutely critical that people speak out around the case of Julian Assange, because it's not only the government sending us a message of what they don't want to be exposed. We have to send a message about understanding what is essential to the functioning of a democratic society.
Thank you so much, Amy Goodman. And up next, I want to bring forward Marjorie Cohen. And Marjorie Cohen is, as mentioned before, on the advisory board of both PDA and the Julian Assange Defense Committee, and is the former president of the National Lawyers Guild. So welcome, Marjorie.
Thank you so much, Alan, and it is my pleasure to be speaking at this event. Thank you so much, Amy, for your words. I want to pick up on what Amy said when she talked about the collateral murder video, which is perhaps the most infamous release that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are responsible for. 18 civilians were killed in that collateral murder video, and it is evidence of 3 separate war crimes under the Geneva Conventions and the Army Field Manual. The first war crime is targeting civilians. The second war crime is targeting the rescuers. And the third war crime is defacing the dead, because after the rescuers came and were fired upon, and many of them died as well, an Army Jeep drove over one of the bodies, severing it in half. So we're talking about evidence of 3 separate war crimes. Amy also referred to the Iraq war logs and the Afghan war diary, and I want to just give you a little bit more detail about exactly what Julian Assange is being indicted for revealing. The 400,000 field reports about the Afghan war included 15,000 unreported deaths of Iraqi civilians and evidence of the systematic murder, torture, and rape by the Iraqi army and authorities that was ignored by US forces. The Afghan war diary published contained 90,000 reports about the war in Afghanistan, and recorded more civilian casualties by coalition forces than the US military had reported. And then there were the Guantanamo files, 779 secret reports about the US government's torture and abuse of nearly 800 men and boys at Guantanamo in violation of the Geneva Conventions and the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Now, Barack Obama indicted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all prior presidents combined. But the Barack Obama Justice Department convened a secret grand jury to determine whether or not to prosecute Julian Assange for revealing evidence of US war crimes. And they determined that they would not prosecute, they would not indict Julian Assange because of what came to be known as the New York Times problem, because they were concerned about running afoul of the First Amendment, freedom of press. Because what WikiLeaks did was the same thing that other outlets did, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, etc. They all published these same documents. And so Obama opted not to prosecute Julian Assange. Well, in comes Donald Trump, who exercised no such forbearance. And in 2018, the Trump administration filed a secret indictment charging Julian Assange with one count of basically hacking under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, carrying 5 years in prison. But they filed, and that became public in 2019. They also filed a superseding indictment that contained 17 charges under the Espionage Act, which would garner Julian Assange 170 years in prison. But then the Trump administration realized, well, if Julian Assange is a journalist and a publisher, there might be a First Amendment issue here. So they filed a second superseding indictment to beef up the initial hacking charge. And the basis for that second superseding indictment was an informant for the FBI named Sigurður Þórðarson. And it turned out, according to an Icelandic publication, Stundin, that Þórðarson perjured himself about Julian Assange being involved in hacking in return for a sweet deal by the FBI, because Þórðarson was a known criminal, perjurer, sex offender, etc. So that's the substance of the case against Julian Assange. In September of 2020, there was a 3-week extradition hearing in London. And on January 4th of 2021, U.S. District Judge Vanessa Baraitser denied the U.S. request for extradition. She concluded that if Julian Assange were extradited to the United States to stand trial on this indictment, that because of his mental state, which had been deteriorating because of the time he spent in asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and the UK government working hand in glove with the US government would not let him out to go to the hospital when he had several very serious health issues, that his mental state, combined with the very harsh conditions of confinement that he would face in the United States, meant that it was very likely that he would commit suicide. And there was extensive psychiatric testimony to that effect. Now, the Trump administration, as it was leaving office, appealed the district judge's denial of extradition. So in comes Joe Biden, who loved to hitch his coattails to his friend Barack on everything except for Julian Assange. So instead of dismissing this indictment, which is what he should have done, which is what Obama didn't file it in the first place, Biden has continued to pursue Trump's appeal of the denial of extradition vigorously. Now, on December 16th of 2021, the US High Court, which is the intermediate appellate court in the UK, reversed the district court's denial of extradition and said, we are going to allow extradition because the US government has come forth with assurances that if he were extradited and imprisoned in the United States, Julian Assange would not face these harsh conditions of confinement, these special administrative measures, which would leave him in virtual isolation. He would not be sent to the special high security ADX prison at Florence, Colorado. Now, the US government didn't provide these so-called assurances during the extradition hearing. They waited until the judge had denied extradition and they said, oh, by the way, we are giving these so-called insurances. But there was a loophole in these assurances big enough to drive a truck through, because if Julian Assange were to commit any act which subjectively these prison authorities in the US deemed appropriate, then he could be subjected to these harsh measures. Moreover, there was testimony at the extradition hearing that even if he was not subjected to these special administrative measures or sent to ADX Florence maximum security prison, he would be held in virtually identical conditions in other prisons under other such conditions. And so, and the fact that these assurances were not brought forth by the US government during the extradition hearing meant that the defense had no opportunity to test them and to argue that, in fact, the US government has given other so-called assurances in other cases, including a case involving Spain, and lied and gone back on their assurances. So this is the appeal point. Now, I do want to say one thing about this UK High Court decision. It didn't mention anything about the threats that the CIA made in 2017 to kidnap and kill Julian Assange. And these were revealed shortly before the appeal came out, in plenty of time to include them in the appellate decision. And in 2017, WikiLeaks exposed the CIA's hacking system of electronic surveillance and cyber warfare called Vault 7. The CIA called the expose the largest data loss in CIA history. And Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump's CIA director, labeled WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service. CIA and administration officials made secret war plans to kidnap and kill Assange, according to an explosive Yahoo News report published 2 months before the High Court ruling. Senior CIA administration officials sought sketches and options for assassinating Assange. Trump himself, and I bet none of you have heard this unless you read that expose by Yahoo News, Trump himself asked whether the CIA could assassinate Assange and provide him options for how to do so. Now, on January 24th of this year, the High Court did not say that Julian Assange, they didn't talk about the merits of his appeal because they had already denied his appeal, but they said that they gave him permission to appeal to the UK Supreme Court because they said that this whole issue of when these so-called assurances must be brought forward and whether the district court judge had a duty to request assurances by the US government constituted a point of law of general public importance, basically paving the way for Julian Assange to ask the Supreme Court of the UK to hear his appeal. And he has filed a notice of appeal in the UK Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court of the UK refuses to hear his appeal or hears his appeal and denies it, in other words, he loses in the Supreme Court, then Assange could file a cross appeal in the High Court asking it to review issues on which the district judge ruled against him. Because keep in mind that the district judge only denied extradition based on that narrow ground of the likelihood of suicide. The issues that Julian Assange raised and lost at the district court level and the issues which he would like to appeal to the High Court if the Supreme Court denies his appeal are, number one, extradition is barred because it would be for a political offense in violation of the US-UK Extradition Act. Number two, extradition should be denied because the prosecution of Assange is pursued for ulterior political motives and not in good faith. And number three, extradition would constitute inhuman and degrading treatment and would result in the denial of a right to fair trial and the right to freedom of expression, all in violation of the European Convention on Human Rights. Eventually, Assange could appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, but these appeals could take years. Meanwhile, Julian Assange's mental and physical health continue to deteriorate. As Amy said, he suffered a mini stroke in October, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Meltzer, who has spent hours speaking with Julian Assange, wrote that the UK is literally torturing him to death. As we warned after examining him, unless relieved of the constant pressure of isolation, arbitrariness and persecution, his health would enter a downward spiral, endangering his life, unquote. We must demand that the Biden administration immediately drop its appeal of the denial of extradition, dismiss the indictment, and Julian Assange must be immediately released and commended for his courage. The future of investigative journalism is at stake. Thank you.
Marjorie Cohen, thank you so much. And while I want to go quickly on to Jody Armour, I do think in the next round of dialogue, I think one thing that I will want to point to is how PDA can partner in sending such messages to the Biden administration, and how we can organize other groups, our allies across the country, to do the same. So thank you for that. Up next is Jody Armour, who is a professor at USC, and I know that Jody's been doing amazing work coordinating with other activists and artists in support of Julian Assange. So welcome, Jody Armour.
Thanks a lot, Alan, and it's really a pleasure to follow both Amy and Marjorie, because they've done such a great job setting the table, the context, giving us the right frames, the right ways to look at this. So I get to dive right into what has been occupying us in LA, those of us who support Assange, over the last couple months. Number of us have gotten together, and it hit me early on, why aren't more people standing in solidarity with Julian Assange? He represents interests that are vital to many of us who are in academia, who are in the arts, freedom of expression, et cetera, and especially journalism. I'm thinking about the kind of journalism that comes out of art, like Public Enemy used to call, Chuck D of Public Enemy used to call rap the Black CNN, right? You had a lot of street level journalism going on, both in rap and with like Darnella Frazier, who recorded George Floyd's murder, right? That was kind of a street level journalism. Now let's go back to rap for a moment, and we can come back to Darnella. There have been folks who've been trying to censor rap, that form of journalism, right? For example, Ice Cube, when I interviewed him after he performed for our students over at USC, he talked about how police would tell him when he stood on stage in the wings, if you go out there and perform, fuck the police, we're gonna lock you up. We're gonna put cuffs on you and lock you up. When he went out there and performed that song, they put cuffs on him and locked him up. Here are the words to that song, by the way. Now tell me this is not political speech and a certain kind of street knowledge, street level journalism. Fuck the police, coming straight from the underground. The young nigga got it bad because I'm brown and not the other color, so police think they have the authority to kill a minority. Now that's anticipating Black Lives Matter movement by 20 years, and yet he's getting locked up for it, right? For that street level journalism. So we wondered, here in LA, Sharon Kyle, Dick Price, Vincent Stefano. I always flub your name, Vincent. I'm sorry, Vinny. Robert Corsini, Wade Kaufman, and others brought together rappers to reflect on the meaning, the significance of the fight that Julian Assange is carrying on for their work, for their ability to be critical of the powers to be, to be critical of the government, and not expect government agents to come down and crack down on them like they're doing more generally with rap. There's a great book out by a colleague of mine out in Richmond, Virginia, called Rap on Trial, about all of these rappers who have been prosecuted and locked up for what they say in their lyrics, in their music, right? Again, if this form of street level journalism in the Black community, the people who are practicing it are being treated like, like criminals, because that is what we've done. We've criminalized journalism. What we've done with Julian Assange's case is allow the government to start to criminalize journalism itself, because he's accused in this Espionage Act of doing the everyday activity, bread and butter stuff of journalism, right? Collaborating with sources, gathering information and disseminating it, classified information and disseminating it, right? That's what the New York Times did. Just like Marjorie Cohen said, the Obama administration in 2010 set up a special grand jury, they wanted Assange bad, because, Hillary Clinton, the State Department, some of those cables related to her work, they wanted him bad. And they tried for years and didn't find anything on him that they could distinguish from the New York Times, right? The Guardian, Der Spiegel, whoever. And so we know that's really what's going on here. We're criminalizing journalism. And a question for us out here is, how do we energize more people? How do we get more people to recognize what's at stake, in this case? And I thought the young artists we had did a great job of connecting what's happening with Assange with their efforts to, do what they do and do it without fear. So I'm just going to stop there because I know we got a lot of folks and a lot of questions, but that's what we're trying to combine art and justice out here to bring Assange's message to more people.
Thank you so much, Professor Armour. And Robert Corsini shared with me a few videos. And at the very end, after we finished with the panel, as we go out, we may play a few of those videos, including from Boots Riley, great filmmaker. I loved his first feature film. And of course, lead singer of The Coup for years. So up next is Nathan Fuller. Nathan Fuller is with the Julian Assange Defense Committee, and welcome, Nathan.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Jody, Marjorie, and Amy for speaking out about this. And thank you so much to the Progressive Democrats of America for partnering with us for this event. I'm really happy to see the attendance here, the really informed comments in the chat. And just the fact that you're making this an issue of concern is really, really important. As you said, I'm the director of the Assange Defense Committee. We're at assangedefense.org. And we're campaigning here in the US to stop the prosecution of Assange, to get the charges dropped immediately. And we're co-chaired by some pretty esteemed folks. Noam Chomsky, Alice Walker, and Daniel Ellsberg are our co-chairs. In addition to, and we have a great steering committee of several folks from LA on this group. And just in the last 2 years since we formed, Assange Defense has grown from a little bi-monthly Zoom meeting from a handful of activists to a nationwide organization. We have chapters in New York, Chicago, Twin Cities, San Francisco, Boston, and obviously Los Angeles. Last year, Julian's brother and father, Gabriel and John Shipton, came to the United States to speak out about this, and we coordinated their nationwide tour. They traveled all down the East Coast and through the Midwest, and eventually over to San Francisco and LA. And they met with just regular folks around the country to talk about this, to two Australians coming in to talk about the First Amendment and how important it is, not just for us, but for everyone around the world. It can be easy to forget that Julian is an Australian citizen who worked in Europe at the time of these allegations. And so the US is attempting to dictate what is published around the world about it. And it doesn't take much to understand the implications if you just reverse that. What if, New York Times writers reporting on Iraq, Yemen, China, whatever it may be, what if those countries then wanted to extradite the US journalists there for just reporting on what their government is doing? We would be outraged, and we would, everyone would be up in arms about that. And so that's what we're dealing with here. During that tour and since, we've worked with some high profile people. We have made supporters of Susan Sarandon, Cornel West, Roger Waters, Marianne Williamson. But there were also just hundreds of activists who made the time to put little events together and welcome John and Gabriel and show that this means a lot to them. And I think we have changed the national conversation. It has taken a while. It has, right around Assange's arrest, there was not many people. There were not many people willing to come out, stick their neck out, and criticize it, especially not those in power. But I think politicians are slowly, if it's too slowly, starting to see that it's not only okay to come out and support dropping these charges, but it's imperative. Late last year, Representative Ro Khanna joined a Free Assange live stream event condemning the prosecution and the threat it poses to investigative journalism. And Ilhan Omar tweeted that the prosecution's indefensible. And that's after, a year and a half of our campaigning. And I think more of that is going to happen soon. I think, we have lots of meetings with staff and just attempting to talk to, a whole lot of politicians about how important this is and how urgent it is. Time is definitely running short for Julian personally. His mental and physical health, as mentioned, are at risk and waning, and the US won the appeal to extradite. So we can't expect or wait for the British courts to sort this out for us. We can't wait until he's here to stand trial to start defending him. First of all, the precedent will already be set to extradite somebody for this kind of crime, but then we have a trial where the First Amendment is at grave risk. So it's important to remember that while this is a UK proceedings, contra the excuses made by the administration, this is not just a legal matter for the courts to decide. The Biden administration and Merrick Garland could drop these charges at any time, and they should. So we need to take this up now. We need to make it like a really important issue. We need to make it something that is urgent, make it a national issue. So I'm just here to talk about AssangeDefense.org as a place to do that. One of our aims, of course, is to publicize information about the case. I report on the legal developments from the extradition hearings in London, but we're also aiming to be an organizing hub for supporters around the country to connect with each other, share ideas, share resources, and make this case the national issue that it should be, making people aware that the First Amendment rights are under serious threat. So please do go to AssangeDefense.org, AssangeDefense.org/take action. We'll have petitions and ways to get involved. Sign up for our newsletter, sign the petitions, get in touch with us. If there's a chapter near you, we connect you with folks already organizing events. And if there's not, we'll talk to you about starting one. So again, just thank you so much for talking about this. And I really appreciate it. Thanks, Alan.
Oh, thank you, Nathan. Hold on. I'm going to toss right back to you a couple questions. After that, we're going to take a very quick 2-minute intermission with Mike Fox. And then we're going to go to our next round, which will be an opportunity for Amy, Jody, Marjorie, and Nathan to speak amongst themselves, maybe respond to what they heard from the other panel members. But quickly, Nathan, I did want to ask about, there was some very good news that really out of nowhere appeared on global news wires this past week, which was an astronomical sum of money raised through a process I can't claim to understand. But if you want to maybe comment on that, because it did seem, it must have been received by the people who are persecuting and prosecuting Julian Assange, and by people around the world as well. This guy really still has amazing support around the world, and it does seem like an opportunity to build upon that at least. What can you clarify about what occurred with this, the NFT, and I suppose it was up for auction, a digital auction, the money was raised, how helpful it is, and an opportunity to build off that momentum.
Okay, so don't count on me to explain all the technical aspects of that, but I definitely do know that this artist named Pack partnered with what's called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, I believe, which was set up specifically to crowdfund cryptocurrency for an auction. And the idea was that they would collect, people around the world would put in whatever cryptocurrency, it was in Ethereum, one type of cryptocurrency different from Bitcoin, which, they all pooled their money together and to bid on this auction with the artist Pac, and with the understanding that all proceeds from the auction would go to Assange's legal defense. And we were, we've seen previous NFT sales for causes. Actually, I'm also the director of the Courage Foundation, and MIA, the rapper, worked with us on an NFT, and that sold for a few tens of thousands of dollars. And so we were expecting maybe something like that, but these people came together, and it was more than 10,000 supporters who joined in and collected more than $52 million. It's just incredible. Just kind of not really fathoming it yet, but yeah, so that will finally be able to, first of all, pay the lawyers who have been working pro bono or near it for a decade. And, but yeah, finally then the campaign as well, I believe, can benefit from this. So yeah, as I think Edward Snowden has tweeted, it's just an incredible sign of support that Julian has. Some people might wonder why that money didn't come earlier, but I believe that's the idea with cryptocurrency, is that you can do this anonymously and it's harder to trace. Some people fear, we at Courage have had other support networks for other journalists, and example for Bear Brown, and the list of donors to his support network was subpoenaed by the government. So there's a little precedent for people to be concerned about their donations being tracked. So anyway, it's as Snowden said, this is, $50 million is nothing to balk at. This is a sign of real support, people willing to put real money behind it and wanting to make change. So that's I definitely recommend others read up more about it if they want more on the technical details, but that's what happened.
Nathan, if you could place your email, if you're willing, into the chat so that maybe people can reach out to you and ask questions about how they can get involved with the Julian Assange Defense Committee. And throwing
Absolutely.
over to sort of start just a little bit about 10, 15 minutes of dialogue among the panelists. I want to maybe toss to Amy Goodman to start with just right now with the Ukraine crisis. We're missing WikiLeaks. How effective has, and I suppose it's been very effective, has this prosecution been at not only shutting down WikiLeaks, but other anybody else who would maybe want to step into and set up a similar operation as, again, the kind of encryptions and stuff and protections that Assange has provided in WikiLeaks for whistleblowers. Amy. Sorry, I think we have to ask to unmute.
Unfortunately, with Ukraine, you see the same beating the drums for war that we're so used to. And I don't know if this has, whether or not we had WikiLeaks, the establishment media, and the Democrats and Republicans together, it has been very sad to watch, instead of a kind of deep questioning of, are we really going to go back in time like this? And, really, it is very possible that we will, even if there wasn't an intention to go to war, you have so many billions of dollars of weapons, so many soldiers on all sides, there can be a terrible mistake. And of course, it's really important to have WikiLeaks and other independent news organizations asking the critical questions. I was just talking to a friend in Madrid, Spain today, saying, how is this being played? And she said, so differently than it is in the United States. There's much more questioning. There is, not this sort of knee-jerk push for war. I don't know if that directly has to do with WikiLeaks and the situation it's in right now, but I do have a question for Marjorie to further talk about how it's possible that Julian Assange can be charged with treason in the United States when he's not an American citizen. And also, I had a chance, I've talked to Nils Meltzer, the former UN rapporteur on torture, several times, and it was very interesting. He came to Colombia and talked about how he wasn't really interested in Julian Assange's case. Sure, he'd heard of him, but he didn't see it in his purview, but someone pushed him just to take a look. And he was just stunned by what he saw and said, there is no question that he is being tortured. And has visited him several times at Belmarsh. And, these are the issues that have to get before the American public, because this isn't a matter of an autocrat holding him somewhere. This is a matter of him being held for the United States, at the behest of the United States and Britain. And if the Biden administration just stopped this prosecution, there is nothing to hold him in the Belmarsh maximum security prison.
Yes, well, to pick up on that question, Amy, Julian Assange is being charged with espionage in the United States for things that were done on the internet. That's the position of the US government, that even though Julian Assange is not a US citizen, he can still be charged under the Espionage Act. And of course, the Espionage Act of 1917 was passed to get spies, not to get publishers who publish information that is provided by whistleblowers, which journalists do all the time routinely. So it is an absolute abuse of the Espionage Act. There's no doubt about it. And yet this is being allowed to happen. And by the time these appeals are exhausted, even if Julian Assange eventually wins the appeals, the toll it is taking on him and the chilling effect that it's having on national security journalism, investigative journalism all over the world is incalculable. I also want to say, yeah, I just want to say one other thing, and that is that there has been a deafening silence in the corporate media about the case of Julian Assange. It's really remarkable, but about 2 or 3 months ago, the New York Times had an editorial that basically said that it was inappropriate to charge Julian Assange under the Espionage Act. It could have gone further, but it was really significant. And so that makes me think that the New York Times sees the writing on the wall and the precedent that Julian Assange's indictment under the Espionage Act would set, and they're very concerned about it. So I thought that that was a very positive development.
And by the way, it's not clear that Ed Snowden would be free today. I mean, he's not totally free. He did not plan to seek political asylum in Russia, but the US pulled his passport when he left Hong Kong, and so he ended up there. He would like to come home, but fears, like Julian, that he would have a political trial where his views would not be able to be heard. But I dare say he would not be free today if it weren't for Julian Assange, who helped him get out of Hong Kong, even though he wasn't ultimately able to come back to the United States. Sarah Harrison, a WikiLeaks staffer, went with Ed Snowden. They ultimately stayed at the airport in Moscow for 6 weeks as this was all fought out. And then ultimately he was forced to stay there. But in just the last few days, this letter has been declassified from 2 senators, right? Wyden and Heinrich of New Mexico, saying exactly what Ed Snowden alleged, that the CIA has been spying on Americans without warrant for years. And this is a letter they wrote a year ago, but just got out.
Marjorie, I too have wondered about the deafening silence about Assange coming from what you would expect to be his natural supporters. For example, many in the media, outside the New York Times, this is an assault on investigative journalism. Everybody's got in journalism has an interest in this, and yet you have this deafening silence. I can't attribute it to anything other than, I don't know what, I'm writing some work about Gary Webb now and Dark Alliance and a lot of the professional jealousy that was directed at him by oracles of the press, like, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times, because he was scooping them in their own backyards. And, I don't know if that is part of it. I know that the DNC wasn't happy and a lot of other people weren't happy when their corruption was exposed in 2016 by WikiLeaks, bringing up some information. So there seems to be a knee-jerk reaction now from a lot of people who are, kind of centrist liberals against Assange on kind of a visceral level. But it's really curious on a lot of levels why it is there isn't more support.
Just to follow up really briefly, Jody, on that, I think that we need to keep firmly in mind that what Julian Assange is being prosecuted for are the 2010-2011 leaks, not leaks, but publication of evidence of US war crimes. He is not being prosecuted for WikiLeaks revelations of the way that the DNC manipulated, Bernie out of getting the nomination and exposed Hillary Clinton's emails. That is not what Julian Assange is being indicted for. He is being indicted for WikiLeaks revelations of US war crimes. Really important to keep that in mind.
I did want to maybe toss to Amy and hear her reflections on Jody's thoughts about why more media doesn't stand up and support. And along those lines, obviously you have now the cable networks far too uncomfortable. It's not at the level of pre-Iraq war, but the drum beating for war coming through. I mean, I heard a report on MSNBC the other day where one of the journalists was saying that an undersecretary of state, a spokesperson, the person was an undersecretary of state and was speaking on behalf of the State Department, had said that Putin had given the green light for an invasion. And this apparently floated for about 90 minutes or 2 hours. And then there was a press conference at which point someone asked, what's the verifiable proof of this? And they go, well, we understand that he actually hasn't done that yet. So I don't know, the drumbeat for war, the corporate media, and why people don't stand up in the media more for Assange. To Amy.
I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, especially because they didn't shy away from his reports. They completely benefited. Der Spiegel, New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, El País, and other publications. He worked with many of them. Being silent or distancing themselves at this point is the same as pointing the finger at him, because of course, as we all know, first they come for someone who's more vulnerable, like Julian Assange, but next up, it will be one of these major publications. And I think it's really important that as we come off the Trump administration, there's a sense of relief that you don't have this kind of targeting of the press. And it is an outrage that people aren't speaking out more. It doesn't matter if the president is Republican or Democrat when it comes to the way we behave as journalists. We have to hold them to account.
So we'll be taking questions from the audience in a moment. And maybe before we head off, I just maybe wanted to ask Marjorie or Amy or Jody or Nathan or anybody who knows, targeting letters towards the White House, towards congressional members on behalf of PDA, or anybody who wants to take initiative on the call or who might be watching on video. What are your recommendations, and how important is it to build support among Congress members? In other words, not just targeting the White House.
Yeah, so I can say, and again, AssangeDefense.org/take-action has sample letters and information about writing to your representatives, also about writing to your local newspaper. We've had a few letters to the editor published. That's another good way to spread the word in your community. And because they are publishing them, and actually the New York Times published one recently, Chicago Tribune did also, so that's important too. But yeah, actually, we have typically directing attention at the Justice Department and Merrick Garland specifically. Jen Psaki has been asked before, the executive branch has been asked about this, and they kind of have the convenient non-answer of, oh, that's a Justice Department. We have an independent judiciary, so we're not going to comment on that. And it is up to Eric Garland, ultimately as Attorney General, to drop the charges. So that's where we're directing a lot of attention. But as you mentioned, support from Congress members is going to help make that happen. They have to care about this. They have to know that their constituents care about this. And as I said, we've been a committee for 2 years now. Initially, we would email representatives or their staffers and get nothing back. And slowly there's a thawing. People are answering us, taking meetings, willing to work with us. And so it's really great to see, but it's also just really important to keep that up because it's otherwise just too easily forgotten.
Can I add something to that, Nathan? It's really important that people, A, pay attention to the news, and when there is a development in the Assange case, whether you happen to run across it or you do a Google alert on Julian Assange, that when there is any kind of an article or an editorial, write a letter to the editor, keep it under 150 words, peg it to the article or the editorial. And even if your letter doesn't get published, it will help other letters get published from the same perspective because they count up the number of letters. Op-eds, of course, are very useful as well, but letters to the editor are not hard to get published in whatever hometown newspaper you have. And we have to get that out there in addition to soliciting support from Congress members. I think it's important to get it out among the populace what exactly is happening here to Julian Assange and what the ramifications are.
So much, Marjorie. And first up is going to be Lynn Harvey. And of course, just a quick request that people keep their comments and their questions focused and brief. And Lynn, you're up.
Hi, this is just for Amy. This is a very dark time we're in, and it's easy for those of us that are activists to lose heart. I watch you every day. You're reporting some very important news. Sometimes it's very bleak to listen to. How do you keep going? That's my question. What sustains you, Amy Goodman? And thank you for your work.
Thank you for the question. I mean, what sustains me are the people that we cover every day, the kind of movements, people who are organizing around the world. You know, you never achieve democracy. You have to fight for it every day. And that people don't give up, that people put everything on the line to do this. That has always inspired me, you know, from being in East Timor and someone digging up in their backyard a little article about US non-binding resolution that had been passed in the House of Representatives that I had never heard of. And there he is in Dili, East Timor saying, see, we know that someday we will be free. And ultimately they were. Or being in Haiti at an underground house, and people who would become candidates for public office would be gunned down. People went to the polls, were gunned down, and the vast majority of Haitians voted. And most people in the US at the time, this is when we were beginning democracy now 25 years ago, most people in the US didn't bother to vote. And yet the vast majority of people there voted. It always gave me enormous hope. And here in this country, in the midst of COVID and this pandemic, every day we, after Democracy Now!, we teach students, fourth graders, graduate students in journalism, a high school class in the Netherlands or in South Africa or in Latin America. And we talk to them about journalism and the importance of journalism. And the fact that they are interested, that they want to hold those in power accountable wherever they are, even if it just starts with their principal. It always so touches me so deeply. And the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, people marching in the streets at the height of the pandemic because so much matters. And they're willing to risk everything. I mean, I don't really think we have a choice. We have to go on and we have to report all of this. And I think hearing all of those voices, you know, providing a forum for everyone. I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day, like war and peace and life and death, and the importance of independent journalism, the fact that KPFK exists and that Pacifica Radio is there, the oldest independent radio network in this country. These all are such sources of hope and inspiration right now.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for the question, Lynn. And you are an amazing, amazing inspiration to me all the time. Thank you. Luis Ortiz Franco, you are up, and your mic should be live.
Yes, I have a question concerning Ukraine. I heard in NPR a couple of days ago, there was a short interview of a journalist who had visited Ukraine, and the journalist was saying that the people in Ukraine were not expecting any wars or saying that an attack was imminent from Russia. And all the answers to those questions were in direct contradiction to what we've been hearing here in the United States. So can anyone clarify that those contradictions in what we hear out there?
I mean, maybe you were listening to Democracy Now!, but we interviewed Masha Gessen, who's the great Russian-American journalist who teaches at Bard, and she's a New Yorker staff writer, and she had just come from Kiev, from Ukraine. And this has been repeated and reported elsewhere as well, that not only are people going about living their lives, but they do not have the same sense of imminence. In fact, you have the president of Ukraine himself warning Biden to stop escalating. I mean, the Ukraine is the ones who are the beneficiaries of this hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons. Germany did not go in on it at the beginning, though Biden's pressing them very hard. There's a new chancellor there. They sent something like 5,000 helmets, which I think is very interesting. Greens are a part of the now governing coalition in Germany. But even the president of Ukraine said, stop beating the drums for war. You're going to push us into this. I really encourage people to go to democracynow.org. You can put in Ukraine. We have so many segments of Russians, Ukrainians, of peace activists around the world, because, you know, that is what is missing from all of the media. And I'm not talking about Fox. I'm talking about CNN, MSNBC. They have the government officials, and they're the ones who are beating the drums for war. You've got the weapons manufacturers. We played one of the CEOs, I think it was of Raytheon, you know, they're all having their annual meetings. They're saying, we've never seen anything like this. Like, our profits are going through the roof. They're unabashed. At a point when you've got bridges in Pittsburgh that are falling down, right? When we can't pass Build Back Better because we supposedly don't have the money, but there isn't a weapon that the Pentagon or the US or the Biden administration doesn't want to send to Ukraine. Even Ukraine is saying, hey, wait a second here. I mean, it is critical. There are organized movements in countries around the world. That's why we interview people in Germany. We interview people in the United States, peace activists who are saying there are other ways to do this. We can de-escalate. You know, war should not be the answer to conflict in the 21st century.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Amy, for the answer. And also to everybody here, perhaps you have all seen the front page of the Los Angeles Times today, but they do have on the front page a picture of a demonstration in Ukraine in which people in Ukraine are saying that they will resist. Whatever happens, they will resist. I guess the implication is even if there's an incursion by Russia, they will resist and they will fight it and so on. So so those signs of I guess resistance to not only the war drums currently here in the United States, but in other places, is that the people in Ukraine, you know, they're not as intimidated as the Biden administration makes it look like they are or we are.
Thank you, sorry, thank you, Professor. And by the way, for next commentators, will cut your mics off after your questions, just because there's so many people on queue. We have about 20 minutes left. But following up from that, I do want to maybe add on what somebody, and I know they're from the Defense Committee, actually asked in the chat, and throw this to the panelists along with Professor Ortiz-Franco's last question. Somebody speculated that one of the reasons that the Biden administration is doing this to Assange is because there is information that the Biden administration doesn't want out that they believe that WikiLeaks holds. I myself have no idea about that, but someone did ask that in the chat, and if anybody has any insights on that.
I think it's just worth noting that WikiLeaks has continued to publish in Julian's absence during his prison time. They've continued to publish. They've published regarding these the fish rot files regarding corruption in the fishing industry in Namibia. So I don't think one can say that WikiLeaks is holding on to something waiting for Julian. This has been he's been in detention of one kind or another for a decade, and in extreme detention and isolation for the last 3 years, and they've continued to publish. That's all I kind of think about that.
I wanted to mention something, and that is that I have no doubt that the CIA, we have the same CIA, even though we have a different CIA director, is still smarting from the Vault 7 revelations from 2017, which is what I think spurred the Trump administration to bring the indictment against Julian Assange, even though it had nothing to do with 2017 revelations. It was 2010 revelations of war crimes. And so I would not be surprised if the Biden administration and Merrick Garland are getting pressure from the CIA to continue the prosecution against Julian Assange, to intimidate WikiLeaks into not publishing future revelations of what the CIA's dirty tricks, basically.
And again, let's be clear, it's not just a threat to WikiLeaks, although I'm sure that is absolutely true. I mean, they are sending a message to all journalists to look behind them all the time. Are you sure that you won't be arrested next if you take this document from someone? I mean, this is basic journalism. Would we know about My Lai if it weren't for Cy Hirsch? Or would we, would we know, of course, about what Daniel Ellsberg did? And this is a threat to all journalists and of course, and to democracy.
So much, Amy. And next up is Glenn. Your mic is on, Glenn.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, Amy Goodman, because my retirement project is what you see behind me as Tampa Bay Video Citizen. It's a democratic, progressive, and public service blog that I started running about 6 months ago. One of the things I noticed is that there's a lot of disinformation out there, and it's going to be my blog's focus to educate the public on disinformation tactics throughout the midterm elections and on different stories. Currently, I'm using First Draft website and their reading material, one being Active Measures by Thomas Rid, and the Handbook of Terror Management Theory by Routledge and Vess as resources, along with other professional papers. I was wondering if you could also steer me to any other resources that I may be able to use to help me educate myself on disinformation tactics that I could present to the public.
I mean, I think you're on every issue, whether we're talking about COVID or we're talking about the climate emergency, it's getting a diversity of opinion. And it's not just about disinformation strategies. It's whenever we are talking about war and peace, or we're talking about science, or discrediting of movements, you really have to dig deep. And democracynow.org is a great place to go to begin, because we link to so many different news organizations, groups, scientific documents and studies. And, it just depends on the issue.
Thank you so much, Amy. And up next is Ruth. Your mic is live, Ruth.
Hi, thank you. All of you were excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you, Alan, for putting this on. I'm a cardiologist, and I'm extremely concerned about this quote unquote mini stroke that Julian had. The medical term is transient ischemic attack, and people who have these go on to have worse events. It's very high incidence and correlation. He may be, I wonder about his medical care, because he could be having transient rhythm disturbances of the heart that could put him at risk for a massive stroke if this were not diagnosed and treated appropriately. And I'm very concerned. You know, he's quote unquote a high value prisoner, but I'm concerned about whether or not he's getting adequate medical care. And I did try to write Stella Morris and a few other people, but if anybody knows about that, please address it. And also, I have put my email in the chat. I'm certainly willing to do anything I can in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I can just say that, yes, so Julian did suffer a mini stroke in late October of last year. And obviously that's the main concern, is that that's a prelude to a bigger one. I can confirm that he is getting treatment for that. He's on stroke prevention medicine, but it's still a concern, and access to healthcare for him has been a main concern for a decade now. He's had doctors had to come to the Ecuadorian embassy when he needed urgent care there, needed to be checked on, and has not been able to get, he's had issues with his shoulder at one point, needed dental work, and it's all been really difficult for him just to get the most basic kind of care. So they're just doing the most minimal things to kind of keep him alive thus far. Although just last month we learned that COVID broke out in his prison wing. So there's so many threats to his health that it makes this all the more urgent to get him out of there.
My colleague Dennis Moynihan and I wrote a piece, calling for the Biden administration to stop prosecuting Julian Assange or persecuting him. And we noted that a coalition of 24 groups, including Human Rights Watch, the ACLU, the Freedom of the Press Foundation, PEN America, Reporters Without Borders, called on the Biden administration to halt the Assange prosecution, saying it threatens press freedom because much of the conduct described in the indictment is conduct that journalists engage in routinely and that they must engage in order to do the work the public needs them to do. Julian Assange shouldn't have to die for this.
Thank you so much. And if somebody can locate that article and the link to it, we'd love to have that in the chat so that people can, when they save the chat, can access the article that Dennis and Amy wrote. Thank you for that, Amy. And Mila Risen.
I just added that link to the chat there.
Okay, that's what it was. Yep. Thank you. I was wondering about that. Thank you. Mila, you're up.
Thank you, Alan, and this a marvelous panel and a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I'm wondering, I don't want to take away in any way from the discussion on Julian Assange, but I wonder if the panelists might also talk about the ongoing war against the whistleblowers, Reality Winner and Nathan Hale. And of course, I want to shout out to Tony Russo, who was Dan Ellsberg's partner in the release of the Pentagon Papers.
Daniel Hale.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Daniel Hill, but I was also talking about Tony Russo. Did I not say Daniel Hill?
You said, yeah.
That's okay.
Actually, Nathan Hale was a relative of Daniel Hale's.
And we have a local activist who has that name, so sorry.
And when Daniel Hale was giving his addressing the judge at his sentencing, he quoted his very famous relative, Nathan Hale, that I have only one life to give for my country.
Any further comments on the whistleblowers from Miles' question? Yeah, I think it seems to be a society-wide problem we're dealing with in this regard. The power of the powerful, right? So Dorothy Wright, you're up. Dorothy?
Oh, you're going? Okay, yeah, no worries.
Oh, Dorothy Wright, are you able to unmute?
All right, now I just got the thing to unmute. Okay, so first of all, Nathan, if you could get Ro Khanna to write a Dear Colleague letter about Julian Assange, then he could get other Congress people to sign onto it. And that's easier than going to, then we can just call our congressman and ask him to sign on to an existing letter. And that's much more efficient to be.
We are working on that, actually. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, if you let us know, then we can work on that. The other thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was this embedding of reporters with the military, because I think that the reporters not only have to fear that they're going to be arrested. Gosh, I'm sorry about my dogs. That they have to fear that they're going to be killed if they report on the truth when they're embedded with the troops. And that's a very scary prospect.
Dorothy.
By the way, I just want to say you never should have to apologize for your dog. Having gotten one myself, what I call a panda, a puppy during the pandemic, and naming her Zazu for the freedom fighting anti-fascist youth of occupied France who loved jazz and swing and fighting the Nazis. They were freedom fighters. She's a freedom fighter, but they also give me great inspiration. And now I forgot what you said. Sorry.
Embedded journalists.
Oh, it's always been, what our tagline for Democracy Now! Is unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour. And unembedded is so important at every level. I mean, there are some great journalists like Rick Rowley who embeds with soldiers to really get a sense of war. But the whole embedding process, for example, that happened with Iraq and beyond, has so compromised journalism. I mean, one of the Pentagon press secretary, I think it was, who said, who considered it just an unrivaled success that they came up with this, because you're sleeping with the soldiers, you're eating with them, your life is in their hands. Of course, it's going to lead to a kind of unquestioning, favorable view that doesn't ask the bigger questions about why we are there.
Thank you, Amy. And up next is Francis, and your mic is live, Francis.
Hi, thank you all. This is such an awesome conversation, as always. And Amy, it's really wonderful to see you. I want to bring up the issue that I'm shocked that more people seem to not have been tuned into yet, of the Dear White Staffers phenomenon, the anonymous Instagram account that has basically just unearthed the flood of former congressional staffers all reporting the trauma that they've experienced for decades on Capitol Hill. Certain members of Congress are getting called out. It's really been shaking things up. And it's nothing, obviously, that should be terribly surprising. A friend of mine, Dara Barlin, wrote a book recently called New Kind of Power that talks about the solutions and strategies for these and why these phenomena are happening, and especially how toxic they are in government environments. And I wanted to kind of ask in particular, or for any of the guest comments on that phenomenon and how we can, I think, and it ties to this issue in that the level of toxicity and the bad ethics that clearly are infused in our government system, I think, is not terribly shocking when you see the larger lack of ethics on issues like war and peace, and just wanted to bring up that topic for conversation and see what you all thought about that phenomenon.
Hey, quickly though, Francis, can you just describe to people who aren't familiar with it what you're referring to? And also, I do want to say we are near the top of the hour. Beth, we're going to go quickly through the next 4 questions. Beth Angel's going to have the final question. Then we'll have an opportunity for the whole panel to respond to your questions plus final comments. Okay, quickly, Francis, if you could describe.
Yeah, what started as a meme account on Instagram end of last year, it was an anonymous account, kind of, and the meme accounts were touching on some of the things, the discrimination and toxicity that they've experienced on Capitol Hill, and staffers have just started to email in, and they've started to really share these real life stories, and it has literally been something that congressional folks have not been able to ignore. In fact, congressional Congress people have been having to figure out how to deal with it. It has led to President Biden having to come out, and 130 members of Congress coming out in support of unionization of congressional staffers. So it's really making change, and it's it's powerful.
Okay, to the panel.
I think you made the good point. I think you educated us, but also, can you say the book again?
Meme called Dear White Staffers, right?
No, the Instagram account is Dear White Staffers. The book, and I put in the chat, is called New Kind of Power. My friend, I just put the link in that I sent you a direct message, and now I just shared that one with everyone. But she would love to be on your show as a guest. And she actually runs the Center for Transforming Culture, and does workshops and trainings on the issue.
Great, great.
And for everybody who doesn't know, there are 3 little dots down at the bottom of the chat thing, and if you click on them over on the far right side under the chat, it'll have a save chat option, and before we sign off, people can save the chat and all the details will be there. David Petrov, you're first. Somebody who had their hand up, I noticed, just dropped. I hope I didn't miss them. Please put your hand up if you were that person. But David, you're up first. Then Judy, then Beth, Jamu. Because the other person put their hand down, you can get the final word. So the 4 of you, if you can all keep your comments to 30 seconds or less. David.
Be hard to keep it to 30 seconds. I was just curious, concerned about the impending war that we've got going with Russia. I should say continuing war, because I'm calling from Traverse City, Michigan, the northern Michigan, which was the home of where the troops were trained to go to their first invasion of Russia in 1918. We're in the process of doing more training here right now. Camp Grayling is the big military base here in Michigan. And I saw it just a couple of weeks ago. They were doing cold weather training with all the large weapons and big guns and things like that. We are centered, well, actually, this is kind of like the green zone, I believe, of America right now. Anyway, yeah, we've got all that stuff going on up here, but it's something about our prior war and that we're leading toward it. We've never stopped our 100-year war with Russia.
Thank you so much. Judy, you're up. We're going to go Judy, Beth, Jamu, then back to the panel. So question about the 100-year war. Go ahead, Judy.
Same lines, you know, we've been being fed this idea that Putin may do a false flag incident in order to justify invading Ukraine. And I'm wondering if our government may, in fact, if Russia's going to prove us wrong, are we going to initiate a false flag incident that will force Russia to respond, and then we can blame them for it?
Judy, and a false flag question, and over to Beth Angel.
2 quick questions. I was wondering what the chances are for Assange to get released and to have all charges dropped, and any comments on all the negative comments made about WikiLeaks that it's not real news. Thank you.
Thank you. And a Jamu, final question or comment. You're muted still, Jamu.
This question here is that I'm listening to the discussion around Julian Assange, my heart, and I do I have support for Julian Assange, but in the larger context of this discussion, when we talk about the First Amendment, the question I'm posing, and I put this in the chat as well too, is that why should the vast majority of the multi-working class should be concerned about this issue? How does this issue impact upon their living standards based upon, given the rapacious nature the capitalist system is wreaking upon the people's lives? Jody, you mentioned as well too, because you echoed Ice Cube and what he had suffered under what is called the First Amendment. But one of the things here is that how do we reach those that demographics? And secondly, this type of art, not rap itself, but the art, the message itself is very decadent and bourgeois. And so, and then how do we convince people? How do we change that as well too? Given that First Amendment right, that First Amendment criteria that art should have some type of social redeeming value. And what I'm hearing is definitely not. So how do we reach out to those how do we reach out to the multiracial working class to make the connections that how does Julian Assange's status impact their living standards when they've been bombarded under a rapacious nature of capitalism?
And thank you. That's a great question, and it's directed at Jody. So Jody, you're up, and then we'll take the question about Assange being released, the Ukraine questions, and then we'll do final comments. Jody. Jody, are you able to unmute?
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm sorry about that. The importance of art in promoting social justice, not only through music, but through cinema, through dance, through theater, you know, a lot of kinds of art forms we've been trying to bring together in support of Assange, because we've seen that kind of art can make a difference. We saw with the Black Lives Matter movement that, you know, art can reach a lot of people and get them in sync and help them to unify and that sort of thing. But you're right, you have to distinguish the good from the bad, you know, the stuff that is more, you know, kind of helpful from that is more hurtful. And I'm ready to engage that question, and we have to do it, you know, without, I can't give you any quick generalizations on that. Let me just make one point about Black Lives Matter that I think the movement that applies to Julian Assange's case directly. And that is the effort by the state to take away any sympathy for the victims of its abuse by tarnishing those victims, by saying that they are in some way bad people and undeserving, right? And BLM said, no, you do not have to be Dudley damn do-right to deserve respect as a person, right? You see the same thing with Julian Assange. They floated, you know, some claims about him committing sexual assault, which, you know, for a lot of people on the left, you know, sexual assault, believe women, you know, if he was involved in any way with that proves that maybe he's caught up with misogyny. I'm not going to have any empathy or sympathy with his plight. You know, that's what I'm concerned about. Rather, when you look at the facts, though, you realize that he said, I'm ready to go and answer these charges, go up to Sweden and answer these charges, as long as your authorities will promise not to extradite me to the US so that they can persecute me. And the authorities in Sweden would refuse to do that. So, but they're still using those sexual assault allegations a lot of times to smear him with people on the left. And we have to see through it. And BLM helped us to get beyond that. You have to be morally immaculate to deserve to be treated with human decency.
Thank you so much. And other panels have an opportunity to answer that, but I want to toss first to the prospects of Julian effectively the prosecution ending through acquittal in the UK. Maybe Marjorie would want to take that. Marjorie or any other panelists want to comment on that? The prospects of a very positive result coming from UK?
It's not a question of acquittal in the UK because he's not being tried in the UK. The UK is being asked to extradite him to the United States for trial in the United States. And so the first order of business is to prevent that extradition. And that means expanding the movement on all fronts, including among people here, among activists, pressuring Congress members, writing letters to the editor, writing op-eds, calling the White House, agitating to try to prevent that extradition. If he is extradited to the United States and stands trial, that would be in the Eastern District of Virginia, one of the most conservative, probably the most conservative jurisdiction in the country. Very unlikely he would get a fair trial, particularly because of the cooperation of the corporate media, which will criticize him and take him through the ringer. But there's one last thing I want to say, and that is that all of these charges under the Espionage Act talk about that what was done to the detriment of the national security of the United States. And I think Noam Chomsky said it best, and remember, he is one of the co-chairs of Assange defense, along with Dan Ellsberg and Alice Walker. And he said that whenever the government invokes national security, it's because they don't want the people to know what they're doing in their name. National security really means the security of the state against its own citizens. I think we need to quote that far and wide.
Right, and I do want to say there is a very vibrant support structure in the UK, correct, where Jeremy Corbyn, Tariq Ali, a number of prominent people are involved. And so for people who might be watching this in the UK, you would recommend that they network with that group. And any specific action they should take in terms of contacting, I don't know, the UK Supreme Court? Is there a way to do that?
I'll just add that that group is Don't Extradite Assange, and they are at don'textraditeassange.com. And yeah, they handle everything in London. They've organized really big events, joined in with peace marches, and are yeah on the ground in London.
And do you have a link for that you could drop in maybe, Nathan?
Sure.
Into the
Yeah.
chat?
Don'textraditeassange.com. Yeah.
We
And-
want to tackle the thing. Oh, go ahead.
I
Amy.
have to go, but on the question of the false flag operation, I really encourage people, you can go to democracynow.org. We played a clip of the great AP reporter at the State Department, Matt Lee, who asks excellent questions on a regular basis. And he was questioning the State Department spokesperson, who's formerly from the CIA, Ned Price. And he said, you put forward this notion that they are doing a false flag operation. What evidence do you have for us? And Ned Price said, well, I just told you. He said, no, I asked what evidence you have, not that you just, he said, the fact that I told you is the evidence. And when you ask what gives me hope, it's questions like this and this ongoing questioning, like of the drone strike in Afghanistan that extended through to the whoever it was who opened fire after the suicide bomber in Afghanistan. We just did that report on Friday, interviewing CNN reporter, as ProPublica also did a report on this. But we have to continually question those in power and not take what they say because they are in power. That is why KPFK is so important. It's why Pacifica is so important. It's why Democracy Now! Is so important.
Thank you. And we should take that as your final comments or any final thoughts you want to leave us with.
No, that's it.
Oh, Amy Goodman, thank you so much. And it's great to see you live in person. So thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Amy.
And let's move for final comments. Let's just go Marjorie, Jody, and then Nathan. So Marjorie, you're up next.
Yes, I think that the most important thing to come out of this meeting is that people should be energized and mobilized to spread the word. And that means sharing articles from Democracy Now!, from other people who have written articles. If you go to truthout.org, I've written a number of articles about the Assange case. Spread the information, educate people, and agitate, because we have to stop this persecution of Julian Assange. Not only does his life depend upon it, but the future of journalism, particularly investigative journalism, and the ability of the American people to know what the government is doing in our name and see through and counter the lies coming from the government, they are all at stake, and the time is now.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And I want to say, Robert Corsini just put 4 links into the chat. And as you can see, I was just about to do the same thing myself. So Robert had sent me these, and everybody should check them out after this event. They're really quite amazing. I watched them the other day, and we won't be able to have time to get to them in this program. Up next is Jody Armour. Jody.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about the very good question asked by the brother at the very end of how does Assange issues, translate to on the ground bread and butter issues for a lot of people out here struggling in the street every day, day in and day out. And I think the answer to that really is an important question is that I've come to realize how vitally important journalism is in this pitched battle that we're in now over the soul of this nation. And I saw out in the streets how 6 weeks in a row here in LA, every day the streets were roiling with thousands and thousands of people, and that translated in the ballot box to enormous change. We got George Gascon, progressive prosecutor, came in, ousted a traditional Measure J, a defund the police. The voters responded to that, and that was really an example of Black journalism, in a sense, like I said, Darnella Frazier, making sure that video got out, exposing government abuse by those police officers. And so I think the stakes are enormous because journalism is so important right now. They're framing the debate that we're in the middle of right now. We need good journalism that is not tethered and hamstrung. And so that's why I really kind of see this as translating into bread and butter importance for people on the ground.
Thank you so much, Jody, for that. And Nathan, final word.
Sure, yeah, I've been thinking about that question as well, and just want to note that one of our first events that we put on as the committee was titled Julian Assange, His Right to Publish is Your Right to Know. And we're not just talking about journalists or a special class of people here. we're talking about the freedom of expression for everybody, but then also of your right to know what your government is doing in your name and often with your tax dollars. As you point out, as Jody points out, Darnella Frazier is exposing, there are parallels exposing the killing of George Floyd, and before that, the killing of Eric Garner was filmed by Ramsey Orta, and the only person who went to jail for that killing was the person who filmed it. And so there are these kind of parallels that are the only person who's gone to jail for CIA torture was the whistleblower John Kiriakou. The only one persecuted or prosecuted for the collateral murder war crime is the person who exposed it. So there are definitely parallels on the of small and large scale, but also this is about your right to know. Every movement is affected here. We talked a lot about the Iraq war logs and the Afghan war logs, but there's also the State Department cables showing the way the US conducts diplomacy around the world. And this has incredible amounts of information about environmental activism, corporate corruption, surveillance. It affects everybody in different ways. There's so much material there, and it affects all of us. So this is a really vital case. And just again, thanks so much to PDA for partnering with us on this.
Thank you so much. And everything you say, I can only just echo and accent and heighten. And one particular note, Nathan, before we close out, is that PDA is structured in our advocacy that if the Dear Colleague letter does come through, we have a distributed congressional liaison program. So that would be something we would definitely do. But it does sound like contacting Merrick Garland's office is also something we can do, and we can coordinate with some of our allies, such as Code Pink, to really get that going in the next few days. So
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the panelists, Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now!, Marjorie Cohen, the advisory board member of PDA and the Assange Defense Committee, USC Professor Jody Armour, and Nathan Fuller from the Assange Defense Committee. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Get to work. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
So let's close the recording out, Mike Fox. And
How y'all doing? This is Chris DR, live from Los Angeles. All right. Yeah. Let freedom ring, let freedom ring. Let freedom ring, let freedom ring. Let freedom ring, let freedom ring. All right. Of course. Man, of course they want to extradite, extrafy, exemplify, expedite the end of time. Welcome to America, center of the Western world, where there's no such thing as a truth or lie. Nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to scrutinize, cause it's all swept under the rug, real snug, real nice. The real thugs wear cufflinks, not gloves, and we'll probably never see a jail selling their lives. There's no such things as checks and balances, just cashing checks and checking balances. Y'all done took democracy and flipped it on its head, giving yourselves a raise while we're trillions in debt. And millions are left in the winter cold, behind on rent, mortgage payments, student loans, and wondering, what are we doing wrong? We went left expecting a helping hand from an artillery man. Humanitarian acts from a helmet head, hell-bent on military expansion. Yeah, Julian is a true threat to the Julius Caesars. The problem is they don't get a true leader, doesn't even need to be there for the followers to carry on procedures. No longer will they conquer and divide at their leisure. You got some explaining to do, heinous acts to speak for. Thank God for the whistleblowers, freedom bringers. Yeah, let freedom ring, let freedom ring. Let freedom ring, let freedom ring. Free Julian Assange, free Snowden, and free Daniel Hale. Long live Gary Webb. Thank you.